A common sentiment in the Godzilla fandom is that Godzilla is very versatile. He can go from being goofy, serious, or a force of nature. But is that what the films have shown? The original film in 1954 was very serious and presented Godzilla as a nuclear disaster. The only thing capable of stopping Godzilla here was something potentially more dangerous than even the atomic bomb. The creator of this weapon destroyed all of his research before sacrificing himself to stop Godzilla. Now, the 1954 film had set a clear standard for Godzilla's character. The film showcased a monster representing the danger and effects of nuclear weapons, while at the same time, the film presented Godzilla as the invasive horror that nuclear weapons can be. Due to the success of Gojira, a series of 14 films would be produced. But by the third film, Godzilla had lost all of his meaning, with the films having him be weak to electricity, having him trip over himself, and not even being able to beat the weakest of monsters. And in terms of his character, he stood for not much of anything at all. This form of Godzilla is what most people knew him as before the American Godzilla films. The superhero, flying, dancing, Muppet-looking person in a suit. With even Ishiro Honda, the director of the Showa Godzilla films, looking back on this series and saying how he didn't like how they had Godzilla act this way, as he believed it was a bad decision and made Godzilla look fake. What makes this worse is in films like Godzilla vs. Hedorah, which showcase the effect and reality of pollution. The only way this pollution monster can be stopped is by Godzilla, who is the friend to humanity in this film. While this version of Godzilla may have been entertaining at points, and certain films were well made, the way he is presented in the Showa series makes him no different than Gamera or any other giant monster. And when trying to present a new message such as Hedorah, it adds an opposite effect when considering Godzilla's meaning and powers. Now, 10 years later after the Showa Godzilla series had ended, a new series had started in 1984. Yet this Godzilla still had its drawbacks. Most of the problems had to do with portraying Godzilla as a mindless beast, having him clumsily walk through the city, as well as the film not making him a serious threat. But 5 years later, for the 1989 film Godzilla vs. Biollante, a new crew led by Koichi Kawakita completely changed Godzilla. Here he is more ruthless, animalistic, and has the threat the original Godzilla posed, and then some. Unlike the Showa era, which had Godzilla be the hero while trying to stop pollution or aliens, Godzilla sticks to his nuclear origins. And despite fighting another monster here, he is actively a threat to humanity's existence. This would start the staple in the Heisei era of messing with nature, the effects of nuclear radiation, and the result of humanity's decisions. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 showcases this perfectly, with neither humanity or Godzilla being the villain. And even considering this, Godzilla's character remains consistent, having him be the direct danger of nuclear weapons and wrath of nature. The following film, with Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, the message is lacking, and isn't well set up due to poor writing. However, the following year, the most literal form of Godzilla's origins took shape, in Godzilla vs. Destoroyah. Here Godzilla literally becomes a nuclear bomb, which is powerful enough to destroy the entire Earth. This film also introduces Destoroyah, which is a monster mutated by the original Oxygen Destroyer, and ironically, Destoroyah draining Godzilla's energy is the only thing that could stop Godzilla's explosion, calling back huge ties to the original film. But in the end, Godzilla melts down and revives his son, leaving another Godzilla to walk the Earth, thus ending the Heisei Godzilla series. Now, following the conclusion of the Heisei Godzilla series, an American Godzilla film was released. The 1998 film presented a giant lizard with spines on its back that died to missiles. Yeah, that's about it. Apart from the name and roar, there is nothing about this monster that is similar to Godzilla. They even go as far to remove his atomic breath, which even the least faithful versions had so far. It's easy to say the series went from the most similar to the original with vs. Destoroyah to the least faithful with Godzilla 1998. But in 1999, the return of Godzilla happened. No, not that one. This time, Godzilla's return was in Japan, and continued the series for 5 more years. This series of films are all different storylines, with most of them representing Godzilla as a force of nature, but lacking the strong nuclear ties. But a huge problem with these films is that a majority of them try and replicate the G-Force story in the Heisei era, except without the deeper meaning or build-up. GMK, on the other hand, despite being a poorly made film, showcased Godzilla very similar to the original in terms of its nuclear destruction. And ending off the Millennium era, Godzilla Final Wars basically was a combat film, just using Godzilla monsters. Any deeper meaning to Godzilla in this film hardly matters. Now, 10 years later, Godzilla 2014 was released, and it once again kickstarted the Godzilla franchise. The film introduces Godzilla as a force of nature who is actively trying to keep the world in balance. This alone wouldn't be a huge problem if it wasn't for Godzilla being presented as the hero in the following films. But before those films were released, Shin Godzilla happened. In terms of its story and presentation, it's very similar to the original film. The design, however, is very far removed from Godzilla, as well as the random powers that come out of nowhere. And instead of the decently active and intentionally malicious Godzilla from 1954, Shin Godzilla is more of an empty shell, attacking whatever hits him first. This makes Godzilla much lesser of a threat and much more predictable. And in between Shin Godzilla and the next MonsterVerse film was the Godzilla Earth trilogy. Basically, it's a plant Godzilla that takes over the Earth and barely does anything. Moving on, with King of the Monsters, the follow-up to Godzilla 2014 and continuation of the MonsterVerse. Despite drawing parallels to Serizawa's sacrifice in the original film, here the humans give Godzilla a nuclear bomb, which causes him to incinerate the city. Yeah, that's kind of the opposite message of the original film. Now this by itself might not have been as bad if the characters didn't literally say Godzilla was on their side, right after he left the city uninhabitable from radiation that they purposely gave him. And Godzilla vs. Kong from 2021, on the other hand, doesn't do much better. Except this time, Godzilla shoots a hole directly into the hollow Earth. All the while, the film and characters present Godzilla as being the misunderstood hero, who's just trying to balance the Earth. Now, 2 years later after Godzilla vs. Kong, a film I was looking very much forward to was released, with Godzilla Minus One. And it is the most similar to what Godzilla is supposed to be, except one small, unimportant detail. Godzilla dies from a plane exploding in his mouth. Yeah, that literally goes against what every Godzilla film has shown in this franchise. And these aren't even the 1998 high-grade missiles. Even then, it still took around 10 hitting Godzilla before he was fatally injured. Yet here, a plane exploding in Godzilla's mouth completely blows up his head. But apart from that huge problem, the film showcases Godzilla very well, with his atomic breath being powerful and him having an impact on the humans. But even to that point, it is greatly diminished due to the plot conveniences where the main characters are spared throughout the film. Now, considering this, along with him literally being destroyed by normal weapons from the 1940s, this highly reduces the message of Godzilla being the destruction of nuclear weapons and unstoppable force of nature. And following that up was Godzilla x Kong. Remember Godzilla being the balance of nature and setting the monsters in line? Yeah, neither does this film. Godzilla basically destroys everything that moves here, from planes to random monsters. However, even then, he doesn't really have any weight in this film, as his involvement feels forced in, and doesn't really mean much, other than having monster battles. The MonsterVerse now has made it so that legendary Godzilla doesn't even stand for the balance of nature. He's just territorial, and will destroy anything due to that. So with all of this in mind, can Godzilla be anything? Yes, he can. From a dancing monster to representing nuclear dangers, Godzilla can be anything. However, can is the ability. This doesn't mean that it's what it's supposed to be, or that it's faithful to the character of Godzilla. Now this also isn't to say that the other films aren't good, since films like Godzilla vs. Kong 2021, Godzilla Minus One, Son of Godzilla, and Godzilla 2000 are all pretty good films. But saying Godzilla can be anything would be the same as if he took Hedorah and no longer included the message about pollution, despite the monster's whole purpose being that one topic. Thank you all for watching, make sure you like and subscribe, and I'll see you all later.